The natural person does not accept the things of the Spirit of God. He is not able to understand them. 1 Corinthians 2:14. None of the wicked shall understand, but those who are wise shall understand. Daniel 12:10.
When you hear the word revelation, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For a lot of us, it's probably all these chaotic images, confusing prophecies, maybe a little bit of doom and gloom, right? The book is just wrapped in this aura of mystery, and we often see it as this terrifying sneak peek at the end of the world. But is that what it's really all about? The book's original Greek title, Apocalypsis, doesn't actually mean catastrophe or the end. It means an unveiling or a disclosure. So from the very first word, the book isn't trying to hide things in some impossible code. Its whole point is to reveal a hidden truth. That one little word changes everything about how we should approach this.
Okay, so to really get what's being unveiled here, we've got to understand the type of writing we're dealing with. It belongs to a genre that scholars call apocalyptic literature, and believe me, it has its own set of rules.
The best way to think about it is like a political cartoon. You know how if you don't know the politicians or the current events, it just looks like a weird, bizarre drawing? But for the audience who's in the know, those symbols are a super clear and powerful way to talk about what's really going on, politically and spiritually. That's exactly what's happening here.
And we have to remember, this wasn't just some abstract poem written in a vacuum. Nope, this was a real letter, written by a real person in a very real and very dangerous situation. And it was sent to real people going through a tough time.
Getting the context here is absolutely crucial. So, who's writing? It's John the Apostle. When? Way back around AD 95. And he's not in some comfy office. He's in exile on the island of Patmos. He's writing to 7 specific churches in a place called Asia Minor. And the whole reason he's writing is to encourage them while they were facing some pretty intense persecution from the Roman Empire.
And these weren't symbolic, imaginary churches, no way. These were real congregations in real cities that were actually on a postal route in what we now call modern-day Turkey. John was writing to them about their actual day-to-day struggles and victories.
The main way John communicates is through something called allusion. Now, think of an allusion like a literary hyperlink. He didn't have to spell everything out. He could just use a single image, like a beast rising from the sea, and his readers' minds would instantly click. They would connect the dots to prophecies about oppressive empires that they already knew inside and out from books like Daniel.
And this isn't just something he does here and there for a little bit of flavor. No way. The book of Revelation is absolutely saturated with these things. We're talking over 400 of them. That is more references per verse than any other book in the New Testament. So John isn't inventing some brand new symbolic language. He's basically remixing the Bible's greatest hits into one epic finale. The whole book is built out of Old Testament spare parts.
To put it another way, think of Revelation less like a codebook and more like a giant, intricate tapestry. Every single thread, every image comes from earlier scripture. John is essentially remixing and recombining imagery from the Old Testament. It's like a grand symphony where all these familiar melodies from Israel's scriptures come together for a huge finale. He expected his audience to recognize the music, not be confused by it. And he does this constantly. So when John talks about a beast from the sea, his readers' minds would have immediately jumped to the terrifying beasts in the book of Daniel, which represented oppressive empires. The New Jerusalem wasn't just some sci-fi city. It was the ultimate fulfillment of Isaiah's promise of a renewed creation. And the slain lamb? Wow. That single image powerfully recalls the entire story of redemption, starting with the Passover lamb back in Exodus.
But look, this wasn't just John being fancy with his writing. This heavy use of allusion was a very deliberate strategy, one that was theological, pastoral, and even political.
He really had 3 big motivations here, and each one was absolutely crucial for his audience, who were, living under the shadow of the Roman Empire. He was aiming for continuity, depth, and protection. So first up, theological continuity. By grounding everything in the Old Testament, John is making a huge point. He's showing that the God who acted in Israel's past, the God of the Exodus, the God of the prophets, is the exact same God at work right now. This isn't some weird detour from the main story. It's the climax. Second, it gives the book incredible symbolic depth. Let's face it, some ideas, like the nature of divine authority or the reality of cosmic conflict, are just too big for simple, straightforward language. Allusion lets John paint these epic pictures that get the weight of the ideas across, inviting you to meditate on them, not just try to decode them one for one. And third, and this is so important to get, it offered historical protection. This wasn't about being mysterious for the sake of being mysterious. This was wisdom, born out of intense pressure.
You really have to understand the timeline here. John is writing this while in exile, probably during the reign of Emperor Domitian. This was an emperor who demanded absolute loyalty and even called himself Lord and God. Now, for Christians whose whole thing was Jesus is Lord, this was a huge, dangerous problem. Refusing to go along with the emperor cult could mean losing your job, being shunned, or worse, being killed.
So you see, John couldn't just write an open letter saying, "Hey everyone, the Roman Empire is evil." That would have been a death sentence. Instead, he uses this brilliant, veiled language of allusion. To a Roman official who might intercept the letter, it would just look like a bunch of religious nonsense. But to the believers, the ones who knew their scriptures inside and out, the message was crystal clear. Rome is the new Babylon. And just like every arrogant empire before it, its time is limited. Okay, so knowing all that, the context of persecution, and this clever use of language, how did the first century churches actually hear this message? Did they see it as a book of horror? Not a chance. For them, for the original audience, Revelation was the opposite of confusing. It was clarifying. Because they lived and breathed these Old Testament stories, the imagery wasn't strange, it was familiar. The symbols weren't random, they were powerful. And the message wasn't a puzzle, it was a desperately needed clarification of their reality.
And this gets to the absolute core of the book. In a world that felt completely out of control, dominated by the overwhelming power of Rome, Revelation was this defiant shout of hope. It was a reminder that God, not the emperor, is the one who's truly in charge of history. The whole point was to reassure believers, to give them courage, not to scare them.
So, when we understand this original context, the literary tool of allusion and the historical reality of the Roman Empire, it gives us a completely new and I think much healthier lens for reading the book today. We have to shift our whole focus. The wrong question to ask when we read Revelation is, what strange future event is this describing? Or which modern headline does this symbol match up with? That approach completely detaches the book from the real people it was written for. The right question, the much better question, gets to the heart of what John is actually doing. We should be asking, how does this image connect back to and build on what God has already revealed in the scriptures? How is John using the story of Daniel's beasts to help us understand the empires of his day and ours? You see, in the end, Revelation doesn't ask us to abandon the rest of the Bible to understand it. In fact, it demands that we remember it. And when we read it that way, the book stops being a source of fear and confusion. It becomes what it was always meant to be, a source of profound clarity, a powerful, artful, and hope-filled finale to the entire biblical story. And that kind of leaves us with a provocative thought. What if the best way to understand the end of the story is to remember the beginning?